So a little bit about me. I was asked to start with me. So recently, I just joined a venture firm. And for the couple of you who might not know exactly what a venture firm does, is we write the checks to startups to get them going and hopefully to scale and become successful. And this particular firm, Sparrow Ventures, is focused on a few key themes. And the first one we look at is well-being of people and planet. And that's kind of my interest. Mainly I'm into the sustainability side of that, the planet side. But we do people, the other partners are working on that. Also work and purpose, because that's really why we do things and how it's the importance of having a function in society and authentic human connection. And these theses are not just because we think that they're important for the future we want to build. We actually think the next generation of large, successful companies are going to come from one of these three themes. So to tell you a little bit about how I got there, though, I did, in fact, graduate from Berkeley in 1985, before most of you were born. And incredibly, it was in computer science. I know that sounds crazy that we had computers in 1985, but we did. They were different, but they were computers. And then I did go work for Textron. Now, Textron was a really interesting company because it was a multinational conglomerate. So it made everything from the EasyGo golf cart that's on that slide. This is one of their images. The EasyGo golf cart. They made the MX missile. They made Bell helicopter, Eaton stationery. It was crazy. But they had a big project in Saudi Arabia. And it was all about access control. And for a bizarre reason, I happen to have been an expert at access control stuff, which again seems crazy to people in modern times, that it was actually an issue. You had to swipe your card, and computers had to make that happen, make it open. Saudi Arabia did not look like this. This is all very modern. It was a little bit more rustic when I was there. Still an amazing experience. And I traveled to 27 different countries on other people's money. That is a great, great thing to do in your 20s. I'm just telling you. So as you think about graduating and you go, well, I have these different job opportunities. Oh, this one will send me all over the world. And you get to stay at great hotels. And it's super fun for a while. But I did eventually get bored with that. And I came back, and of course, I came to Silicon Valley. Oh, I actually learned some things. I forgot about that slide. So forgive me a little bit. I haven't had power for 3 days at the house, so I'm a little scrambled here. So I learned a whole ton of different skills that were all over the map, from how to navigate airports and customs officials with all this weird, clunky equipment from the 80s, to how to work with network computers. And then I came back and headed to Silicon Valley, because just like if you're in the movies, you end up in LA no matter what you do. If you're into computers, you end up here. And there are other places, of course. There's Silicon Forest and Silicon Beach and Silicon Swamp and but Silicon Valley is special. And I came here, and of course immediately started going to parties, because I'm looking for a job, right? That's what you do. You network, you go to parties. And I ran into a high school friend of mine, and he said, oh, I've got just the job for you. And I started working on disk drives. Now remember, I was doing access control stuff before. Disk drives turn out to be super interesting things. They're mechanical, they spin, there's a whole vibration component that's really interesting to deal with. They have analog circuitry, they have magnetics, and they have lots of signal processing and advanced DSPs and stuff to make that all work. And software and firmware, and that's what I do. I'm a software guy. So super interesting, didn't know a thing about them when I started, other than you put data on them and get data out. What I designed were the stuff that's inside those drives to get the data off that drive and into computers. Did that for a bunch of years, did all kinds of projects. And it turns out the first one is super, super hard to do. And then the second one is exciting because you know so much more. And by about the fourth disk drive project, they're all exactly the same, pretty much. I mean, they have a little bit of it. I couldn't stand it. And I was actually with Martin, who would later co-found a company with me. And he was also working on disk drives. And we were at DiskCon, which is a conference about disk drives. And it's as exciting as you might imagine. And And we literally thought we had, we might not be able to get out. We had just lost the will to live. And there was an espresso cart. And we stopped at the espresso cart and felt better. We said, we need to quit this and immediately start a company. I learned a whole ton of stuff, particularly about redundancy and incredible reliability, because disk drives are amazingly reliable. Millions and millions and millions of transactions, and they're all flawless. And I can tell you, the data coming off that head is not flawless. There's a whole ton of magic happening to make it so the data comes out perfectly every time, and it can't have an error, or it's the most precise thing I've ever worked with. So Martin and I said, what are we going to do? And we want to do something fun. Disk drives were not fun. They were interesting, not fun, different thing. And we looked at games and books. We like to read books. So we decided to get into the publishing business. So we started the first ebook company, pretty much, that was successful. And this is an early version of the iPad. And again, people see these screens now and in these mobile devices, and you think, well, how could this be a job, right? I mean, this is not that hard. In the early 90s or mid 90s, this was really, really hard. In fact, that display, that black and white display, was the first kind of readable display. That was how we had to convince the venture capitalists that it was actually even possible to do that. We would bring in the display, which is, was just on a board pretty much, and we'd light it up, and they'd go, oh, it is going to be possible to read on a screen. So this company did actually pretty well. We raised a bunch of money. We were successful. I learned all kinds of things about that, but we sold it. We got an incredible offer from Weirdly TV Guide magazine to buy the company in 2000. And for you history buffs, 2000 was a really important year because it's when the dot-com bubble collapsed. And we were really close to the end of that dot-com bubble when we got the, we were still in it, thankfully, but it hadn't quite collapsed. We got the offer, we took it, and Rupert Murdoch then, just after the acquisition of within months, Rupert Murdoch of Fox News fame got control of TV Guide, and he killed the project because he said, no one's ever going to read on a screen. It's just not, no one's ever going to, newspapers and stuff, no one's ever going to read on a screen. He later changed his mind about that, but that was in 2000. So we learned a whole ton of things, and about how to run a business, how to create a business, how to raise money, and a bunch of technical things dealing with batteries and displays, and it was, again, an incredible learning experience. Because when you do a startup, you end up wearing all the hats, right? You do sort of everything. So now we're in nuclear winter. And this was a time, the financial crisis was a Wall Street phenomenon largely, and we were kind of tangentially affected. I mean, the whole economy was affected, the whole world economy was affected. But the dot-com bust was here. We were the epicenter, and it was nuts, and you couldn't raise any money. Good companies were failing because they couldn't raise any follow-on capital. And Judy Estrin, who was a friend of ours, she was the CTO of Cisco at the time, and she had just left Cisco and had started a new company and raised a whole ton of money right before everything froze. So it was a wonderful place, sort of a safe harbor to hang out for a few years and learn something new. And I learned when I was making this slide, I found out that Judy spoke here, I think. I don't know if it was this building, but I mean, yeah, she yeah, exactly, yeah. So I was going to tell Judy that I was in her footsteps as usual, 2 years later. And she was doing a network routing company that had some spin-outs, and it was sort of interesting. I learned all about network plumbing. The internet, I use the internet all the time, but how does it actually work? How do the bits actually get from your phone off and end up, in some server somewhere? Really interesting stuff. Again, a great place to be. I learned all kinds of things, particularly about management. Judy is an amazing manager. Then it was time to do something new. So Martin and I again teamed up, and we tried to figure out something to do that had a little bit more meaning. The fun game thing of the book was great, but we wanted something with a little bit more oomph this time. So we picked oil, and the great thing about oil is it's lots of problems wrapped into one. So in 2003, global warming was just really becoming, a thing that we could understand, although other people had been understanding it since the 50s, it turned out, including the oil companies, which we didn't know at the time. But there was global warming, there was this idea of peak oil, the whole world runs on oil, and if it runs out, that's going to be really, really bad. It creates all kinds of economic distortions all around the world, which is not a good thing. It screws up our trade balance, it does a lot of things that are not good. And having lived in the Middle East for years, it drives the politics and dysfunction in the Middle East. It really, within the Middle East, there are tremendous, strange economies because of the flow of oil. So getting rid of oil or de-emphasizing it was good in all of these different ways. So we started Tesla Motors, and I'm only going to show you a few baby pictures of this, and I'm going to get into something I think more interesting. But so that's a really early roadster that we did. We had a mission, and the mission was to reduce oil consumption by reinventing, the personal car. And I have a whole presentation on, how to find product market fit and how to iterate when you can't, do minimum viable products and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not doing that, thankfully for you guys. We wrote the last business plan ever written in Silicon Valley, I'm pretty sure. Nobody does that anymore, but we were a little old school. We would never do it now, but we did at the time. And went and raised money. And we got money from a couple of small venture firms, and friends and family, of course. And we also found Elon Musk. Now, we knew him kind of differently through the Mars Society. He had spoken at a space enthusiasts event before he had started SpaceX, and then had just started SpaceX about a year before. And then we came down and explained to him about our electric cars, and he was instantly got it. He was totally into the mission. He loved the idea of changing the energy equation of our country, and funded us. And one of the great things about pitching to him in that particular moment was the regular VCs were a little skeptical, electric cars and sports cars, and they did not get it. And they're pretty risk adverse. And they don't like to do crazy things, really. The VCs are very conservative typically. And we walk into SpaceX's first headquarters down there in Hawthorne, and Elon hasn't launched anything yet. I mean, he's a year into it. And he is building rocket ships. And the idea, he's not going to say, wow, that's a crazy idea, electric cars, because, he's building rocket ships. He's got these giant things he's building right behind us. And it took him quite a while to get that to work, but SpaceX is amazing that way. Incredible company, really. We built some mules, which are test cars, basically, that test out certain parts of your technology. We figured out what it was going to look like. The body of the car is kind of called a hat, and our stylist at one is named Barney Hat, which I thought was kind of ironic. And in January, we were driving around in this mule, this funny test car that we had that was testing out our battery systems. So we immediately raised money because it was cool and sexy, and you raise money as soon as you can. When you reach that milestone, you raise more money. You never want to raise money when you need it. You want to always be raising it ahead of when you need it. And if you have a great milestone and a great story to tell, it makes raising the money a lot easier. So we got some more, and Elon had been on the board, and he was supportive, and also came in on the round along with another venture firm. We made motors, and by 2006, we were going to build 10 cars to see if we knew what we were doing. Like, these were the cars we thought we were going to make. We got them off of the sort of prototyping line. We built 10 of them, and they were super beautiful and gorgeous. So, of course, we raised money. That's what you do. Fantastic milestone. Raised a whole bunch of money from all these different people. Tested the hell out of these cars. That's what you do with these engineering prototypes. You try to simulate 10 years of wear and tear and 100,000 miles in a few months. And parts come flying off, and the thing's a total disaster. And every time a part flies off, every time there's a failure, you look to see, why didn't you anticipate that? And then work your way back as to why that failure. What, if it was a mechanical, problem, where was that? Was it a materials issue? Was it a design issue? You go all the way back until you've redesigned that thing. And this was some emissions testing. These are the durability test tracks that we used all around the world. We showed it off. There's Schwarzenegger. It's hard to see, but Schwarzenegger with Martin showing off the car. He's really big. He fit. I was worried, but he fit. Yeah, that was in LA. And we had thousands and thousands and thousands of changes we made that year in the design. And then we finally built 10 of what we were really going to make, these validation prototypes. And there they are, and they were super gorgeous. So of course we raised more money, right? That's what you do. Very important to always know when you're going to raise that next round and how you're going to do it and what milestones you need to achieve, whether it's a revenue metric or in this case a technology, sort of readiness metric. But you got to know what it is, and you got to tell the investors ahead of time. We're going to run out of money here, but before that, we're going to do this milestone, and you're going to love it. And you've got to be always on top of that and always communicating with the investors as to where you are. We had factories, and you can read about this. Martin, my co-founder, gets ousted as CEO in August, and we get an interim CEO, Michael Marcs, and he is a manufacturing expert. And we were having trouble getting into the manufacturing phase for any quantity. And he was the CEO of Flextronics, which is a very, very large contract manufacturer. And he took it from kind of a small mom and pop operation to a giant national operation. But he unfortunately was committed to something else later in the year, so we could only have him for a few months. But he was great and incredibly helpful getting the production figured out. And we had these beautiful cars that we almost could launch. We could almost deliver to customers, but we weren't quite ready yet. He was helping us with that. And then in November, we got our new permanent CEO, Zeb Drory, who was one of the founders of Monolithic Memories, which was a semiconductor company here in Silicon Valley in the Stone Ages. And he was not a good fit for the company, I didn't think, but he joined us and was successful sort of for a little while. We had to raise some more money. This was kind of expensive money because we didn't hit our milestone because we weren't shipping. We expected to ship, and we weren't shipping for a variety of funny technical reasons that we were busy solving. But by June, we were delivering Roadsters. And this is literally the shot right as the very first one comes out. And we had happy customers. And this was an enormous, I have an entire class a lecture that I give to a class on the customer journey and how incredibly important it is. Because ultimately, if your customers are not delighted by your product, it is a failure. If your product is going to save the world, people are so into saving the world unless the product sucks. They just won't do that. I mean, saving the world, it's kind of nice, but I'd rather have this nice thing over here. It really is important that the product be something that makes people happy, that it actually fulfills whatever their need is. So we had happy customers, and then in October, Elon got tired of Zeb, I think, as well, and he became the CEO. And that was actually a fantastic move because he had always, he'd been on the board, pretty much almost from the beginning, and he had always been a very supportive board member. And had obviously, contributed financially, but also just that moral support in the boardroom. It's very important to have a board that's aligned with your mission, and he always was. So he becomes the CEO, and of course, and by this time we had announced the Model S, which is a fabulous car. And now, of course, it's got 33,000 employees, and it's just totally enormous. And it actually had a profitable quarter, which is always good, profit good. And is quite successful. The Roadster went out of production as scheduled. We actually extended it for 2 more years than longer, 2 years longer than we had anticipated. But the new Roadster was announced, and the new Roadster, I think, is super exciting, and it's unbelievably quick. The old Roadster was really, really quick. This thing is actually, I think, at the theoretical limit of what's possible. I don't think there will ever be a car that is quicker in acceleration than this Roadster, unless it has jetpacks or something. Because I don't think I think the physics doesn't permit it. I think it's right at the limit. So I'm super excited about seeing that. And even GM. Now that GM is a thing, you could have a whole lecture just on General Motors. Because they had to work at their failures in a way that most companies don't imagine doing. And they had the EV1, which was they sort of pioneered electric cars. and then took them all back from their owners and crushed them. Their owners loved them and they crushed them. You don't do that. Do not take products back that your customers love and crush them. That's just, only GM does that. And they had this great quote that they said, electric cars are dead. They're forever dead. They're never, it isn't going to be possible. And this was the quote from 2 years ago, that they're going to lead the electric car revolution from behind, I assume. But it's great that they're at least getting on board, because we need a lot of electric cars out there for a whole variety of reasons. So I want to just talk for a moment about changing your focus. So if you notice, I did all these random weird things. I'm a venture capitalist now, and I was in Saudi Arabia doing security stuff and disk drives. And people say, well, these are all, where did you go to school for this? How did you know how to build a car or whatever? And of course, the answer is nobody knows how to do that stuff. You kind of learn while doing. And because the basic thing is that most of it is just engineering. It's really clear thought. It's getting access to the right people. It's trying to understand the problem at a deep level and just keep iterating through understanding and keep that network of people that you're always bringing in that hopefully know a lot more than you do. And you can do huge changes in what your career is. So the fact that you have a computer science degree or a mechanical engineering degree doesn't mean you have to only be working at Oracle or whatever, or Facebook. You can do all kinds of crazy things, because the idea of engineering and science, it's all based on the science. It all works the same way. There is no magic, at least not that we know of yet, although some of it sort of seems. Now, the other thing is that these things change the future. They actually make the future the way we want it to be. And I'm really curious about lots and lots of different things. So I take all kinds of random classes at Coursera, and I've learned all kinds of crazy stuff from that. And sometimes there are connections that I wouldn't expect. And I actually do another lecture where I talk about those connections, but I'm going to tell you just a couple insights. One is that progress is not inevitable. We assume it is because for so long recently, it's been progressing along. The next year is always kind of better than the year before in terms of technology and our ability to do stuff. So Rome, had been in decline, let's say, but it still was amazing. They invented everything. They invented, cement and running water and indoor heating and cooling. The shopping mall. They invented the shopping mall. It didn't exist until then. And in 476, the Eternal City, which nobody imagined would ever fall, even though when we look back historically, we go, oh, of course it's going to fall. They had no choice. But the people in Rome, the people all around Rome, the people that depended on the Roman Empire, couldn't imagine the world without it. It had been the center of the known world for 1,000 years, the Eternal City. No one could ever remember a time when it wasn't, the most important thing around. And in 476, it gets the final destruction happens, and everything is lost. Cement, running water, sewer plants. I mean, they had all of that. Shopping malls. All of those things failed. They all were forgotten. We didn't rediscover cement, concrete, until after during the Renaissance. The Renaissance masters looked at these structures that they had made, the Romans had made, and they marveled at the liquid stone that they somehow had. And it's hard to believe we could fall so far so fast. So all of this gets lost, except for astrology. Now, one of the things I discovered while, in my random class thing, in my cathedrals, course, was that the earliest cathedral windows that survive, even from the 1100s, 1200s, have all the exactly the same astrological signs that we use today in whatever form we use them in. So for 1,000 years we didn't have running water or indoor plumbing, but we had astrology. So we really, really, really don't want to do this again, because this next fall is going to be very, very bad. And I actually don't think we can recover from it. because of the way we've used resources, if we actually had a technological collapse now, we can't just go and reopen those Roman-era copper mines like the Renaissance people did. Because those copper mines, we've used all that up. Now we have to move whole mountainsides, which we do really well because we have an enormous technology base to move that mountainside and to get that copper out. So if we have a problem in the future, it might not actually be possible to recover. So we don't want to go there. And everything is going to change. So Herbert Stein, who's an economist, has got this marvelous quote that if something cannot go on forever, it will stop. And people go, oh, well, that's so obvious. Of course, if it can't go on forever, it'll stop. But it actually means that if something is not sustainable, so people say, oh, sustainability, it's all about those hippies, but it's seriously, that's what people say. But it's not, because what it's saying is that if it's not sustainable, you have to ask, well, when will it stop? And when a company is making a product or a process or a food system or whatever it is that we're talking about, if it's not sustainable, by definition, it's going to stop. Now, maybe it's going to stop 1,000 years from now, and you can go, okay, well, probably 1,000 years from now, we'll have it figured out. But a lot of these things are not 1,000 years away anymore. They're more like 50 years away. And 50 years, I know to a lot of you, 50 years seems like forever. It actually, I'm older than that, and it doesn't seem long at all. So we really want to work on solving some of these big problems. And there's lots of things that aren't working well. There's a ton of things that are breaking in our society. Whether it's from climate change or resource depletions of various kinds or the tremendous inequality in incomes. But we really have to think about how we're going to fix these things because we make these things. And we're seeing the effects today. So some of you may remember Hurricane Michael. So this happened about a year ago, almost exactly. And it hit Mexico Beach, Florida. And it was a Category 4, I think Category 4 storm. They'd never had a storm, anything like that in that part of Florida ever in recorded history. And here it comes blasting up. And the thing that was so devastating about it was this rapid intensification. It went from kind of a tropical depression to kind of a mild storm to a really, really dangerous storm very, very quickly. And the reason it did that was because the Gulf waters were warmer than they had ever been before. And it turns out that hurricanes get their energy, they get that rotation from the physics of the warm water beneath them. They don't care whether you believe in climate change or not. Those people in Mexico Beach, Florida, most of them didn't believe in climate change. It's not, it's a red district. And it spun up so fast and it hit them. And we know exactly why that water was warm, because that's where the excess heat goes. It goes in the oceans. It's the big thermal mass, right? Where else is it going to be? So these people, though, thought about it. So that's Dr. Lackey and Mr. King, their nephew and uncle, and they decided to build a beach house in Mexico Beach, Florida. And many of you may have seen this in the Times. It's a fascinating article. And they told the architect, they said they want what they wanted, and they told the architect, we're actually really concerned about this climate change stuff. And they had the architect design it to withstand a hurricane like there had never been in Mexico Beach. Because they said, as the waters get warmer, things spin up faster. It seems like someday this is going to happen, and we want our house to survive for generations. So here's their house. Most of the structures here the foundations have even been washed away. And their house was in perfect condition. The only thing that they lost was a stairway that goes up to that second floor. And that stairway was designed by the architect to rip away in the event of tidal surges, so it wouldn't rip the house apart. It would just break off and go away. So that was by design. They lost the stairway. And they also had, the winds were 150 miles an hour. They lost a bathroom window was broken. Something must have come at it at 150 miles an hour and smashed into a bathroom window. But that was it. The other houses were completely totaled. 72 people died. And their thing was that, we just thought, well, this climate change thing is for real. We want to be prepared for it. Now, they imagined their children or their children's children, this scene being played out, and the children's children looking back at their parents or grandparents saying, wow, you guys really thought about this. That was clever. They didn't think that, 2 years after they built it, this would happen, because things are happening a little bit faster than we thought. But to me, this is really hopeful, because it shows that if you think about it and you are planful, you can actually, we can make this work. The world's not going to go back to the way it was, but we can, kind of figure it out. It didn't require some breakthrough in technology. I mean, they just asked the architect, they said, build it to withstand, a Hurricane 4. So we're going to this time where we have these amazing, crazy technologies. CRISPR, of course, is everywhere. We have synthetic biology. We can do these amazing things. We are becoming increasingly godlike at a good time, because we're going to need these abilities. And there is some, there are some dangers. Like, one of the things I'm particularly interested in is this thing called a gene drive. And that is where you can force a gene through multiple generations through a population. And you want to do that, perhaps, if you want to get rid of an invasive species on an island. So you can release, some male rats, let's say, and those male rats have this gene drive built in so that every one of their offspring is only a male, no matter what. And they, 100%, and you release it on the island, and within a few generations, because those genes are greedy, they always get through, the population of these invasive rats is gone. I mean, what could go wrong? So there's a lot of interesting, super exciting technologies. We're going to have to be really careful about it. But we can't not do it, because we're going to need all these tools. Obviously, AI and machine learning. Machines did not learn in 1985. The best Berkeley had was fuzzy logic, which was like really interesting, kind of, but not really there. Really neat stuff. It can go awry, as we know. And we're building entirely new food systems, which we need, because the food systems are largely unsustainable. And many of you may have seen Beyond and Impossible, which are synthetic burgers basically from plants. We also have these milks that are sort of milks, like oat milk and everything else. And I drink these things. My favorite new one, though, which I admit I have not tried, is plant milk. They're not even sure what they used, I don't think, because you'd think it would be, cashew milk or something, but it's just plant milk. We use some kind of plant that we found on the road or whatever. I don't know what, the marketing on that, I'm not a marketing person, but it's always was kind of interesting to me. But they're not real milk, because in your heart of hearts, it's not real milk, because you can't make cheese with it. And cheese helps the world live. So, so my favorite new food system, and I've never spoken to these people, and I'm sure they hate this slide if someday someone's going to come up to me and go, I can't believe you described my company as a cow in a vat. But there's this company called Perfect Day, and they using genetically modified yeasts, are creating dairy proteins in vats. So the idea is that you will have dairy, milk that you brew essentially like beer. And that, of course, can be made into cheese, because it's actually the dairy proteins. And they actually had their first sampling of of a product, which was ice cream. And the ice cream was really good. It was not only good ice cream, but it was indistinguishable from cow's milk ice cream, because, of course, it was cow's milk. It just came from a vat. It's super exciting. I hope that they succeed. I love the idea, because lots of these systems have big impacts. And many people have heard about, the problem with cows and stuff. But it's surprising when you actually even look at it in the context of California. So we have about 100 million acres in California. We have 40 million Californians. And almost all of us, like 80% of us, can someone tell me what percentage of the land that 80% of us live on in California? A number, somebody throw out a, what is it? 2%, that's too low. 15, 20. Yeah, it's 5.3. And you can sort of guess that must be something like that, because if you think about where everybody lives, it's the Bay Area, and they're almost all in their cars on the freeways at any given moment. So there's the Bay Area, there's Los Angeles, there's San Diego, Sacramento, Stockton, Fresno, I don't know. I mean, you're getting way down there by the time you only name a handful of cities. So almost all of us live in this little tiny piece, which is great. I mean, we like to live here. It's beautiful. It's where the weather is best. But we have a lot of cows, and they live on 38% of the land. And we're not a dairy state. We're not a big cow state. But 38% of the land is currently used as cattle ranches in the state. And not that we would suddenly move people there. I don't think that there's any interest in that. But what it does say is that the environmental footprint of our cheese and our milk is actually really, really large. And we should be able to do better than that. These lands used to have elk and all kinds of things, and now they just have cows. In fact, some of you may have seen the controversy around the Thule elk in Point Reyes, because they want to get rid of some of the last remaining, Thule elk, because there's a lot of them now in this little tiny area, so they can get more cows in there. And it's like we have enough cows, I think. And if we can grow them in a vat, we don't even need them. I imagine a world where we might be able to rewild California. You take all those things and you put those elk back. You put them everywhere. And of course, maybe grizzly bears. It is something to do with bears here, but there hasn't been a grizzly bear for 100 years. I mean, there's cow bears, but we don't even have our animal anymore. We killed those all off. So we might be able to bring them back, because there are at least, there's an extant population of them. But we might not have to even rely on extant populations. Someone that I know is really deep into de-extinction, which is this idea of bringing back, extinct critters. Woolly mammoths are hard. But they're not, I don't think they're impossible anymore. And we killed them. They were around in California, for 1 million years. Through all kinds of climactic events. It didn't get too warm and they were shaggy and they died. They lived through warm periods in the past. For 1 million years they were here. And then, 10,000 years after humans show up, they're gone. Because, we were really good at hunting them. They probably were, kind of tasty, I don't know. But it'd just be really cool to be driving in the Sacramento Valley and see these things. So I'm going to just end, and then we're going to take some questions. But we made the world the way it is. People think that the world just is, right? But everything you see, there's no nature left in a sense. We created it all. The way that, you walk across campus, every single tree is planted. The hills, the Berkeley hills, there are pictures in the Campanile from the 1800s that show there were no trees at all on the Berkeley hills. At one point, we'd cut them all down, and we planted something completely different. We always remake things. The food that we eat, people say, "Oh, I only eat natural food." I bet you eat broccoli and kale and cauliflower. And they go, "Yeah, that's natural." We made that from mustard plants in the last 1,000 years. I bet you eat corn and wheat. Corn. The native peoples, the first peoples in the Americas, they made corn. They created it out of nothing, out of grass, really. I mean, we're really, really good at remaking our environment, and we just need to remake the environment that we want. People say, especially young people, I teach a lot in classes, and I was on a school board for years, and we'll have these speakers say, "Oh, you are the future." Well, no, you're going to live in the future, you hope, right? Because if you're not living in the future, that's not so good. But it's not, you have to build the future. You have to will it into existence. You create it by your actions, by the things that you get involved in, and by the work that you do. Progress is not inevitable. Remember Rome, 1,000 years without, running water. Astrology, but no running water. And we literally make that world of what we do. And you want to make the future you want, not somebody else's weird dystopian thing, or just let it kind of free run, because it will in a really bad way. So we want to work on the things that we care about, which is the reason why I joined Sparrow, in fact, because they only fund things that I care about. So with that, I'm going to take some questions. Someone's got to have a question. Oh.
Okay. Hi, my name is Eric. I'm an industrial engineering senior. One of the things that I was really struck by in your presentation was that it seems like the Bay Area, Silicon Valley Valley really rewards a lot of startups that are, for lack of a better word, ephemeral. Like it's some kind of software magic. Oh, we don't need physical infrastructure. We don't need to build anything. And your approach in your career has been, markedly different in that it's been, hardware and physical objects. So, what do you feel, or how do you feel about that sort of environment in Silicon Valley? How do you feel that hardware or real physical objects factor into it, especially as a VC?
Well, right, yeah, with my venture hat. So I actually like hardware, as you might imagine, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is that it's hard. I mean, it's certainly more difficult, and it creates a barrier to entry. So if it's just a piece of software, I always ask, what's the barrier to entry? I mean, like I was a pretty good software guy, so could I just duplicate that pretty quickly? With hardware, you can't typically do that quite so easily. The other thing is I think hardware creates an unfair advantage in the long term because the cost of starting a software company has gotten way lower, right? I mean, it's really, really come down from when we started. But so has hardware. Things that used to cost tens of thousands of dollars for us to do, even as recently as 2003, are much, much cheaper now to do because of our modern technology. So hardware is good, I think. There are VCs that specialize in that. In fact, if you go to Playground Global over in Palo Alto, weirdly in the Fry's parking lot, if you've ever been Fry's in Palo Alto, they're actually in the parking lot. They have this huge building. And they have the coolest hardware labs for their portfolio companies. It's like a dreamscape of equipment that they have there at the VC's office so that hardware companies that need those super expensive tools, instead of, they fund some company, and instead of them having to then go rent it or buy it, they just come and use it at the office. And it's super fun to go visit there. So I like hardware. Not all VCs will do it, and it takes a little bit longer. You have to it takes longer to get to revenue, but I think it's great. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Aiden Teeger, and I'm a junior studying business here. And I was wondering, what do you think is the biggest hurdle to really getting to that next step of sustainability? Is it technology, more people trying to focus on that, or is it really educating consumers on them being more conscious in the way that they interact with the products that they buy?
Yeah, educating consumers, I think changing consumer behavior is really hard. And again, it goes back to your product has to be better. And people will only do so much to save the world, and then they really want to go back to their really convenient product. So, there's obviously some, people don't smoke nearly as much. I mean, there are things that you can change in the consumer behavior, but in general, you want to be able to delight them with the product. So I think more it's clever products. There's some regulatory changes that would help. I mean, there's certainly subsidies in place for carbon fuels and stuff. The biggest change would be a carbon tax, because then it would percolate through everything and we could know exactly the damage everything is doing. I think the main thing though is there are these big established players in the market, and people assume you can't attack them basically, like the car companies, for example. And they are vulnerable. Nobody thought AOL was, it could be attacked or whatever on the, during the internet era, because they were so dominant for a while, or Cisco for that matter, or Sun. And it turns out that, if you have some novel product that's better, consumers are pretty good at detecting something that's better and more fun. So I just think we need better, more interesting products. Some of those are going to be more expensive when they come out, so they're going to have to be marketed in a really interesting way to give that premium experience to people that can afford it, so you can drive the price down and make it ubiquitous, which is what electric cars are doing right now, and what cell phones did, and what every technology. So I think that a big barrier is imagination, because a lot of people just want to go sell ads, and I'm kind of done with that. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Isabel Moss, studying economics at Berkeley. Thank you so much for sharing your great story. So, could you recommend 3 books or Coursera lectures that you can recommend?
I recommend a book? Is that...
Yeah, regarding sustainability.
one of the things is that stuff changes a lot and really quickly. There was there's a ton of books right now on sustainability. There's, Cradle to Cradle is a famous one about products that can be reused continuously and remade. There are some great, I'm trying to think of a particular one that's more modern. There was a book that's based actually in the UK, but they had an appendix for the US called Renewable Energy Without the Hot Air, I think. And it was interesting because each chapter would take some politicians or some CEO's statement about what wonderful thing they were going to do, and then go back to first principles and see, does this actually make sense? So an example would be, when some energy minister in the UK said, we're gonna become energy independent with windmills and with wind turbines, and they're just huge. So they go, okay, well, what is that? What does huge really mean? And so he calculates. He shows, and the equations are very simple. How much wind actually passes over Britain at the time, how much wind you could possibly capture with wind turbines, what their efficiencies are. What if you put a wind turbine every square kilometer across the entire country? You discover there isn't enough wind blowing across. Even if you covered the UK in wind turbines, it wouldn't be enough. So it's a great book because everything goes back to first principles of what really matters and how it actually works. So even though a particular thing like wind turbines in Scotland or whatever might not be interesting, the approach is super important. And we did it all the time at Tesla.
Okay. Hi, my name is Tristan. I'm a freshman here studying mechanical engineering. And I have two questions that are completely unrelated. Our first is, what made you want to go abroad rather than directly to Silicon Valley after you graduated from Cal? And my second question was, whose idea was it to start Tesla by manufacturing a sports car with a Lotus rather than an SUV or a common car that would be suitable for the modern family?
Okay, so the first question, travel's fun. I had done some consulting when I was at Berkeley. I had a little bit of money. I went to Europe and said, "Oh, this is really great." So when I got an offer to go work in foreign countries and travel, you want to see the world. At least I did when I was 20. I still want to see the world. I love traveling. It hardly even takes anything. I got excited about going to my son's soccer game in Turlock. I'd never been to Turlock. It sounds great. And then why not start with an SUV? So admittedly, SUVs sell really well, particularly here, and even in 2003 when we were coming up with it. The problem is that we couldn't come into the market there. So we looked at electric cars and we said, what are the things that make it better? Because again, it's going back to, we don't want to make something lame, we want something that's better. And one of the things that electric cars can do is out-accelerate any internal combustion engine car. The physics favors electric. In fact, every Bugatti supercar now is at least, none of them are pure electric, but they're all electric assist because the only way that you can get crazy acceleration is with electricity because of the way the torque curves work. So we looked at that market and we said, so we have these advantages. We have these, it's clean, it doesn't have any emissions, and it is super, super quick. It turns out that there's a group of people who care about that. And that's the sports car market. In fact, if you look at the sports car prices and you look at their acceleration, they're directly correlated. The quicker the sports car is, the more people are willing to pay for it. Now, why that is, because it's kind of fun, but it gets really crazy. People spend a huge amount to go 1/10 of a second, faster. And the interesting thing about internal combustion engine cars is that those 0 to 60 times are all based on professional drivers doing it, because it's actually super hard to get that kind of acceleration in an internal combustion engine car. Professional driver on a track with nearly an empty gas tank, because every gram slows you down, and they have just enough gas for 2 runs, and they do the first run and they time it, and almost always it isn't good enough, and they come back and they do it again, and they put a little bit more gas, and they do it again and again, until they get, and there's a competition between the magazines to time this 0 to 60 time. With an electric car, you simply step on the accelerator and the car launches you at as fast as physics will allow. So we looked at that and we said, well, shoot, there is this group of people who are willing to pay crazy prices for something that goes really, really quick. And that is one thing that electric car can do. It also is the one thing that the myth about electric cars is that they're slow like golf carts. And we thought, if nothing else, we will crush that myth. Even if the company fails, no one will think of electric cars as slow. They will go, oh, when I become rich, I want to have one of those fast electric cars. I don't want one of these old, slow internal combustion engine cars. So we figured our one public service, if that was it, that would be worth it. So we came into the sports car market because we could do that. A small volume. We didn't need to raise $1 billion to get an SUV, which is what it takes to get an SUV on the market. It's about $1 billion. We didn't have to do that because sports cars are small volume because it's only for a small segment of the population can afford them, and we could make money at them. So we had to come in there. We couldn't come in for the mass car, and that's why Tesla, as it's developed its technology and got it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and has access to more and more capital, it's pushed the price down on every iteration of every turn of the crank. That was part of the plan.
I am Dhaval from the Haas. The question I had is, what is your thoughts on Tesla today? Like that it's acquired Solar City and stuff like that. And what is your feeling about the state of the Silicon Valley with respect to any new interesting projects in hardware and in general?
Yeah, in the state of Tesla, in Solar City, I don't know anything really about that other than what I've read in the press. I will say that if they don't get a whole bunch of orders for power walls and backup power, I'm going to be shocked because everybody that I know is now saying, "Oh, I need one of those Tesla power walls after this last month." Really, I'm in the queue too. I'm like, I've got to solve this. Silicon Valley, is always changing and it does what's hot. The thing that's different, so in 1999, we also had record low unemployment. In San Mateo County where I live, we had 1.4% unemployment there. And I think now we're about 1.9, so it's kind of similar, sort of. But this is different, and it's different in a funny way in that it seems to be based on sort of record profits largely, whereas during the dot-com thing, it was based on sort of record IPOs, which is a different metric. And the companies that have gone public that are hemorrhaging money without a plan to make money have not done well on the markets, which was not the case in 1999, 2000, man. Anything could go public and it would just take off. So it seems better now. The thing that is, the only problem I think is that everything is so expensive now. Technology has gotten cheaper. You can do all these things that are cheaper except rent a building. Renting a building is freakishly expensive. And that, I think, is going to hurt us long term. We've got to solve that problem, both with housing and with commercial real estate. It is definitely cramping the Silicon Valley style. So that's my take on that.
What do you think?
Hello?
What do you think is the biggest threat to Tesla, or are you confident of a future that you can be proud in the fact that you've drawn the industry, the dominant traditional players into this space, or do you think there's still a real risk of takeover or defeat to those
Well, Tesla still is in many ways a startup, and startups have troubles executing and they have operational issues. It took Toyota quite a long time to figure out how to make quality cars consistently. That was not, it didn't just happen. It took them like 30 years to figure that out. Hopefully it won't take Tesla as long. I think it does pretty well. There's now competition, which is great. When we were coming out with the Roadster, we wanted to keep it at stealth as long as possible to keep it from people so that we thought that once people saw what we were doing, they would go, oh, of course we could do that too. It turns out it's a lot harder than we thought, but anyway. And then there was lots of board discussion about what we were going to do when we were shipping Roadsters and people could use them and play with them and dissect them. And the amount of time it was going to take before we had the Model S out, which was going to be like 4 years. It was more like 5, but it was going to be quite a long time. And the board was very concerned about, in that interim time, the big guys would wake up, they would see what was possible, and they would crush us. They would all, just put billions of dollars in and create these electric cars, and by the time our sedan was out, there would be 10 other sedans out, and we wouldn't survive. Nowhere in the board meetings did we ever say, what about if it took us longer to build the sedan than we thought, and the entire time the car industry doesn't seem to care, and then we came out with a sedan, and we sold the sedan for 4 or 5 years, sold hundreds and hundreds of thousands of sedans, and the car industry still didn't seem to care, and then suddenly they woke up, right? So this enormous time span that allowed us to get ahead, allowed Tesla to get ahead, we couldn't imagine that business could do that. We thought business would just respond like that. And they're now just beginning to wake up. And even their attempts recently, some of them are okay, and some car companies are getting it more than others, but some of them still, they're barely funding their electric car programs, or they're doing it out of their marketing and PR budgets, which was the traditional way of funding electric car programs, because they had no intention of ever building them. And they're now getting better. I mean, they're now using the engineering budget, which is incredible that they're doing that, but they have a ways to go. So I think competition is going to be great. We want more and more electric cars out there. We want them in all kinds of different shapes and sizes and price points, because there's going to be a tipping point, I think, quite soon where nobody would think about buying an internal combustion engine car because they're more expensive to drive, and they're slow, there's not as much fun, and you have to go to gas stations all the time as opposed to just waking up with a full tank in the morning. And I think once that psychological happens, that flip happens, there's going to be a tremendous adoption. And I'm hoping that the market is going to be growing fast enough that Tesla can, keep its place and keep its advantage. If it doesn't, and the world all becomes electric, and Tesla eventually, gets acquired by somebody, then we won anyway. So hopefully it'll be Tesla though.
Hi, my name is Thomas Johnston. I'm a legal studies senior here, and I want to know how you personally deal with roadblocks and the inspired with the fact that some roadblocks may cause for either you or your team.
Yeah, there are some big ones that come up. So one thing that's really important is to always remember that you may not have the answer. I mean, there's this idea that somehow your particular solution is the most, that's the way we have to go. So I'm a big believer in making sure that we have as much input onto a problem as we can get. Now, obviously, it isn't like a committee. You spend a lot of time in committees. That's not going to work either. But when we would get stuck at something, I would try to bring in, Joyce, she knows a lot about that. Let's get her in and try to figure our way around this. The other thing is I like to go to see if there's a zero order solution, meaning that is this problem that we're facing actually solvable at all? So is there some dumb way that we would never do, but if we did this thing, if we used palladium or whatever the issue was, we could solve it. And then once there's a zero order solution, that always makes me feel better, because then I was like, okay, I know there is a way to solve it. It's not commercially viable, but at least there is a solution. Now we just have to figure out a way of making it actually solvable. So, I mean, and the other thing is, of course, keep the teams from freaking out. It's okay to freak out in certain situations, but you want to project this idea that we're always going to be able to solve the problem. If the team really believes it's hopeless, then it really is hopeless.
Hi, Marc. My name is Avi, and I'm studying computer science, and I'm a sophomore here.
Oh, there you are. Mm-hmm.
My question for you is, following WeWork's IPO failure, has your approach to investment changed? For example, when you look at tech companies that focus on sustainability, now are you looking more at profit or revenue?
Well, we have always, first off, I've only done this venture thing, just this last, 6 months, really. But something like WeWork, so there are lots of business models that require, you want to be growing your revenue and you're having losses along the way. Amazon is the famous example, right? I mean, they lost money every year for like 15 years. But they had enormous revenue growth. And Bezos just kept saying, we can make this profitable, but it'll slow down growth. And it's clear that it was possible to make money doing that, because actually there's a whole history of people selling stuff that makes money, right? I mean, they didn't invent, it wasn't something like totally outlandish. Where companies like WeWork get in trouble is when there's no existence proof that that model actually ever solves. So what you want to see is, revenues going up and at least the margins getting better and better and better so that you have some path to eventually get to profitability. And WeWork, everything just goes like this. The bigger they got, the more money they lost. And then, of course, they had enormous management, sort of at the very top problems, things that would, anytime that you see those kind of shenanigans going on, that's just giant red flags for investors. No one should be investing in companies that do those kinds of inside dealings. And I mean, it's probably, I don't know if it's illegal, but it's certainly unethical. And you don't want management at the top being unethical. And they had this insane valuation. Part of that is, the Vision Fund SoftBank's Vision Fund has distorted valuations everywhere in the world, particularly in Silicon Valley. And somehow WeWork was able to get that insane valuation. The one thing I will say for the CEO, though, is there is something to aspire to, that if you can fail so badly that the investors are willing to give you $1.7 billion to go away, it is an interesting business idea. I mean, it's...
Hi, my name's Alex. I'm a senior studying business. My question to you is, why did you leave Tesla? And what does it feel like to see the company thrive and become so successful after you co-founded and left the company?
It feels great, actually. I love driving around and seeing all these Teslas, and I'm just about to acquire another one. No, I left. So I like small companies. I like startups. And as a company grows, different personalities work better at different levels. We had about 300 people when I left. I was not particularly happy with Zev, and I also, without Martin being there, it just wasn't as much fun. And the board was, confident in Zev, and I was not so confident. And of course, the board lost confidence pretty quickly, but that was a separate thing. But also, there was this thing is that everyone was switching over to the Model S, which was our next big project, which was going to be like another 5-year commitment of work. And I had 3 little kids, and it was time to go do something else. If you've noticed in my checkered career, I seem to switch jobs about every 4 years. So Tesla was kind of longer. It was about 5 years. So I mean, it was in that zone. And then what's weird is I became a politician. I was on the school board for the last 9 years. That was my longest job ever was running the school board, being on the school board.
My name is Lon. I'm a fifth year. I'm studying interdisciplinary studies, taking hospitality, econ classes, industrial engineering classes. I'm writing a thesis on these VC corporate innovation opportunities and sustainability. And I'm kind of curious, with VCs having these historical, focusing on 5 to 10-year returns and these sustainability problems, being more long-term problems that take longer times to kind of solve. How do you see the investment landscape changing to accommodate that? Focusing on sustainability, do you see it, obviously with your background, you kind of understand the space better, so you're able to invest in startups in that space better? Or do you see it on LPs being invested in for even longer times, or even maybe more government influence to help startups or VCs with these sort of investments? Or what do you think is kind of...
Where it's going to work. Yeah, so other countries, not so much the US, but other countries do have government funds that are grants. And we see companies that have raised millions of euros or millions of dollars in various government grants, and they're typically non-dilutive, so I mean, they're like especially great for investment. And actually some of the ones here, even at Berkeley, have had a whole history of grants, getting that technology to a point where it can be commercialized. So the long-term aspect of investing, there are VCs that specialize in that. So an example is the pharma venture capitalists. They know that when they invest in these drugs and stuff, it's like a 15-year, runway or 15-year, return. So there are VCs that, that are out there, but they tend to be, in a different industry. I think that the VCs that invest in hardware companies tend to expect a little bit different time horizon. There's also different VCs that participate at different stages in a company's life. Sparrow, we only invest in sort of early stage. So ideally you have some revenue, you certainly have some product market fit. We write, a few $1 million check, and then we're in the next round. But then that's kind of out of our zone at that point. And other investors can take it on. And sometimes, depending on the length of the fund and stuff, some of the early investors will have an opportunity to get out when the future investors come in. So an individual investor might not stay in for the whole 12 years it takes to get a company to go public. It might only be in segments of it. So there's a lot of different models that work. It's harder. Certainly if you have some crazy app that you convince investors you're going to be able to grow at some insane rate and sell for a ton of money in 6 months, that's really going to be hard to compete with. In terms of a hardware company that's going to take all these years, but it's possible. There's money there for it.
The question down here.
Hi. There are quite a few electric car companies in China that have developed in recent years. Do you see them as, what are your thoughts about it? Do you see them as global competitors eventually, or do you think that Tesla's hardware is still far more advanced?
Well, I think that the Chinese car companies are likely to be, successful and global competitors. They have not made inroads yet in any of the Western markets. There's several here in Silicon Valley. SF Motors is here, and Lucid's largely Chinese. It was not started. It was started here, but and of course Faraday Future came and went. And then there's ones obviously in China. It's quite likely. There aren't any internal combustion engine Chinese cars that have made inroads in Western markets yet either, but that's coming. Japan took a while to figure out how to do that as well. So I'm fully confident that China is going to be a big automotive player, and I hope they're going to be a big automotive player just in electric cars, because we have enough of the internal combustion engine cars. We really don't need any more. We have like 1 trillion of those things out there, or 1 billion of them. We don't need any more of them, I think. We need more electric cars. So I'm hoping China becomes a big player in that.
I think we have time for about 2 more questions. I don't know if there's... Okay.
Hi. Thank you so much for your talk. I think we all learned a lot from you, and we are all inspired by you. My name is James. I'm a sophomore majoring in computer science and data science.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in the idea of the sustainability offered by electric cars that you mentioned as your emissions. But do you think we already have a sustainable way of generating electricity that we use for the cars? And I would also love to hear your comment about public transportation system in the U.S. Do you think that a better public transportation system is actually the best solution to sustainability and transportation problems that we have today?
Yeah, I don't think we have public transportation in the U.S. It's not very good here, and clearly there's an enormous room to improve that. And again, it's one of these things where we don't have to invent very much stuff. We can, literally could buy, fast trains from the French or from the Japanese or whoever, or the Chinese. And why it costs so much, I don't really understand. So public transportation, obviously great, particularly in the cities where the traffic, it's not so much about the sustainability of cars in San Francisco, it's that there's just too many cars. We have to do something because the traffic is moving so slowly. So clearly public transportation should be on the menu. But I think cars are going to be important because there's lots of places, particularly in the States, that are a little bit more spread out. And it's kind of hard to imagine how you could do that entirely, with public transportation efficiently. In terms of power generation, we have lots and lots of ways of making electricity. everything, obviously from the wind and solar, which has gotten really cheap. In fact, while I was driving here, I was listening to Marketplace, and there was a coal company that went bankrupt. And the CEO had been saying it was all about regulation. And of course, in the bankruptcy filing, the first thing he said, the main thing was that they just can't compete on price against wind and solar and natural gas. And they just can't sell it because it's too expensive. So we have lots of ways of making electricity. Storing electricity is the key to make the renewables valuable. And we're not there yet. But there's a bunch of work being done actually here at Cyclotron Road and in other places at that other university further down the bay. That has, lots of red stuff. They're doing some interesting stuff too on energy storage. So I mean, like that's, once we get lots of energy storage, and that's going to help with, if we had a utility company that actually invested in infrastructure, one could imagine they would put in a lot of energy storage locally, and that helps with renewables and grid stability. But we know how to generate electricity because we can and nuclear power works. So we just have to be careful with it. So there's lots of things that we can use for electricity. The other thing is that we're getting lots of energy use is going down. The lights in this building are using a fraction of the amount of energy they used to, and I'd love to just divert that all into the transportation matrix.
I think we have
One question left.
Elon Musk has like a reputation for using his factories and like working like crazy hours. How do you think, with him being on top, how do you think that affects like the whole company and like the workers' expectation and like pressure that they put on themselves to follow their leaders and things like that? And also in terms of sustainability, we have things like energy industry that's like transportation that's pretty obvious that it needs innovation. Do you think there is an untapped market that people have not looked into yet regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, for Elon, I mean, he works all the time. I would get these, emails from him at these weird hours, and I think, God, I hope he's in a different time zone because, like, how could? But he'd know he'd be in LA or whatever. He's very. That is what he does. He just works all the time, and I don't think that's healthy for most people. He seems to thrive on it, but it's not my style at all. And I don't think you can't run a team that way for long because they get burned out. It's one thing to do that leading up to a launch event or to some big deliverable, but it can't sustain that way. I don't think that's possible. But I don't really, I haven't worked there in years, so I don't really know how his management style has influenced the culture. But I suspect, if you're in that inner circle, it's probably pretty intense. And then I've forgotten the second question. I was so focused on Elon.
The second question is that in terms of innovation and
sustainability, and particularly about big energy companies, right?
So like we have obvious industry that needs innovation, like energy, transportation.
Right.
Is there another market or industry that's not as obvious?
Food is the other. I mean, the sort of farming, the whole food systems have to be redesigned because they're actually largely not sustainable. And some of them can go on for a long time, but some of them can't. In California, we have a lot of agriculture, and we have to be, the valley is actually sinking because of our water use. It's meters lower than it used to be. Just because of collapsing of the aquifers underneath it. And eventually you can't go any deeper, it stops, that whole thing about it can't go on forever, it'll stop. So yeah, lots of things. Water is an obvious one around here. So anyway, I guess that was it. So thank you all.